Hey everyone, if you love true crime, mysteries, and the darker side of human nature, you're gonna love my new YouTube channel called Saturn Soul. We're taking all the gripping documentary-style topics covered here and turning them into fantastically edited and engaging true crime-style videos. You can find the link to subscribe to Saturn Soul down below. Thank you, and enjoy. His name was Sean, and I met him on Tinder. I won't say it was love at first sight. It took a bit of cajoling from him to get me to agree to a date. He wasn't really my type. Kinda looked like he loved himself, a tall and buff guy. I'm usually into slightly pudgier guys who, well, I'm sure you don't care about that. But trust me, fellas, women who like normal guys are out there. And Sean won me over with a sense of humor, his smooth talking, and his absolute geekery. I'm a big Marvel fan, or, well, I was back then anyway, and I went to all the movies in the theater on opening weekend whenever possible. I was also really big into horror, especially the Conjuring universe, so Sean eventually won me over by inviting me to go with him to see The Nun. Hey, the movies are a pretty easy place for a first date. If it's going badly, you can just sort of shift away in your seat and ignore the other person for the duration of the film. He picked me up at a nearby Starbucks. Don't give random Tinder dates your address, people. And we drove to the theater. And honestly, he was great. Really charming, fun, and generally a good time. He knew his movies too. A nerd in a sort of cute way, which is basically just to say that he's a nerd. Now the one problem was, he was fairly pessimistic about the prospects for The Nun. I'll give him this. He ended up being right. Man, that movie sucked. And let's not even mention the sequel, but this isn't about that. Sean was certain that the first movie was going to suck, even though we were going on opening night, and he was promising me that he had something in mind that would make the experience way more memorable, quote-unquote. Well, here we go, I was thinking. He's going to make sure that we get seats in the back row, and I'm going to be in for an evening of dodging make-out attempts and groping hands. Still, I wasn't too dissuaded by the former, at least. If only that's what Sean had planned, though. We grabbed our tickets and some popcorn and even a hot dog. Sean was against the idea of buying a drink, though. According to him, needing to leave the theater to use the bathroom ruined any movie. I mean, I guess I could buy that. I did miss a key scene in The Dark Knight thanks to a bathroom break, but it is a bit psychotic with salty popcorn. And sure enough, when he led us into the theater, he headed straight for the back row. We'd arrived very early for the showing, and it was one of those small-town theaters where you just kind of chose whatever seats were available. He led us down the aisle of the back row until we were basically in the middle looking down at the screen. It was a prime spot, in fairness, and I was fine with the seating arrangement. We sat there making small talk, laughing at the ads and then watching the trailers quietly like good moviegoers should. Then the lights dimmed. Sean finished his hot dog, and he positioned the popcorn between us, and our hands brushed a couple of times as we shared the salted goodness. And I even felt a bit of a spark there. The movie started off not too bad. I was kind of enjoying it, honestly. Thaisa Farmiga can win me over very easily. But Sean, however, was not enjoying it. He kept nudging me, making whispered comments about how crappy it was and how it could use some extra scares. I mostly just ignored him because, honestly, I was enjoying it and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. And then he told me to look down. At the same time, I felt something prodding into my side. Sean was sitting on my left, and other than an elderly couple at the end of the row on the right, we had the whole line to ourselves. I looked down. Sean was holding the biggest hunting knife I had ever seen, and the tip of it was very slightly pressed into my side. I remember his words like it was yesterday. Move, or call for help, or do anything, and the blade goes in. He said, just keep watching the movie. And so we did. And throughout, he kept making goofy remarks and joking comments as if he didn't have a huge knife held against me. And I was absolutely trembling, terrified and speechless with fear almost. At times I had to stifle back sobs as I replied to his inane jibes at the movie. At this point, I had no idea if he'd lose his mind in anger if I disagreed with him calling the movie garbage or something. I mean, it kinda was, and it got worse as it went on, but obviously I didn't really care at that point. And at that point I was just begging for it to be over. Scenarios were running through my head. What would happen when the credits rolled? Would he expect us to just walk out like nothing had happened? Would I be getting a blade to the gut? I understood now why he'd forbidden us from getting a soda. Not only could it have required me to get up, but it would have improved the chances of me actually pissing myself in fear. I genuinely cannot express to you the terror of sitting there for 90 minutes with a blade gently pushing into the soft flesh of my stomach. I wanted to do something. I knew if I called out for help, he'd be able to gut me before I could receive so much as a look of concern from fellow moviegoers. And then, thank God, the movie was over. We sat there for a moment, and the credits were rolling, and the knife was still pressing into me. The theater lights went up, and that's when I saw it. It was a literal prop knife. Now, before you think I'm some idiot, it was a professional-level movie prop, I'll be honest. He must have paid top dollar for it, and I could only tell because in the light I could see the official Rob Zombie's Halloween movie branding on the handle. I guess it explained how he held it steady enough that it felt like it could penetrate me at any moment, but never did. And Sean was grinning at me like he'd just given me the world's best treat. "There, didn't I make a terrible movie a hell of a lot scarier?" he said. When he saw the absolute murderous rage on my face, I could tell he was genuinely surprised. This idiot, this moron idiot jackass, had genuinely believed that just because I was a horror fan, I'd be delighted and grateful at him causing me one of the worst hours of my entire life. I can't remember exactly what I said, but I know it was far too obscene to share on this channel, and I also know it resulted in me throwing the rest of the popcorn straight in his smug, idiot face. And most of it was still untouched due to me fearing for my life. I stormed straight out of that movie theater, told the manager, who was a friend of mine, and obviously was advised to call the cops. There was barely a charge in response, something to do with causing undue stress, but due to the stupid way the laws worked at the time, the low lighting didn't make the charge worse, and the fact that it was an obvious toy made it harder to push for anything more serious. I did make sure to press charges, but he ended up getting off with some slap on the wrist. Thankfully, a very sympathetic judge granted me a restraining order, not that I think I had any danger of hearing from Sean again, and in his eyes, I was the crazy, hysterical woman who couldn't handle being an actual horror fan, all because I wasn't cool with having to spend the duration of that movie thinking that I was going to get stabbed to death. And so, Sean, screw you. I hope the possessed doll of Annabelle eats you in your sleep. So it was a busy show, and the movie was The Silence of the Lambs. I didn't know much about it, and I hadn't read the book. All I knew was that my buddy had told me that it was gnarly and that we had to go. And then, when the time came, he canceled on me an hour before the movie started, and I just decided to go by myself. There wasn't an empty seat in the house, though. The commercials had started as I made my way down the aisle and squeezed along the row to my seat. A few mutters and mumbles from the moviegoers I squished past, and then I finally just jumped into my seat. Now, the guy next to me was wearing a very thick old coat and what I actually recognized to be a Tribbley, even though it was spring and the theater was fairly stuffy. Now, I apologized for bumping into him, and I thought that I heard some sort of grunt or belch or whatever gross. And so I just sat there, and my God, the guy's body odor was not pleasant. I took a deep inhale of my popcorn and hoped that that would help, and by the time the movie started, it got easier to just ignore the guy. Now, Silence of the Lambs starts off as a very tense movie and only gets more tense from there. Occasionally, I felt my theater neighbor's shoulder brush against mine and kind of nudge him back over to the left. I couldn't hear any snoring, but I was sure that I could feel the occasional vibration of a snore at least. And in the end, as the movie got more and more terrifying and gripping, the act of nudging the guy off my shoulder became kind of instinct. I ate my popcorn and nachos, finished my soda, and I somehow made it through the whole movie without needing to get up and use the bathroom, which was great because imagine how many people I'd have made angry in the crowded theater. And that's why when the movie ended and I was stuck there in the middle of the center aisle, surrounded on all sides by crowds, I decided to just wait it out. I watched all the credits until the lights started to go up and it looked like I had a clear path to the right from which I could actually exit. That's when I noticed something. The guy next to me was still there. I didn't want to just leave him there asleep, and it would kind of suck if he missed the entire movie too, so I gave him on the tap of the shoulder saying, "Hey buddy, you okay?" Now I'm sure you Let's Read listeners have worked out the twist here. As I gently nudged his shoulder, the man, or should I say his body, slumped over to the left and his hat fell off. In the rising lights of the theater, I could see it now. This dude was dead. D-E-A-D. Absolutely stone cold dead. I don't mean he'd dropped dead in the last 10 minutes either. I mean, I'd clearly been sitting next to a corpse for the entire showing of that movie. So how did he make a sound? Why was I sure that I could hear and feel him? Now, cops kind of explained this to me later, and when I first nudged him, I'd likely just caused some gas to escape his body. And during the point of decomposition he was at, the body starts to bloat with gas, which could have caused the vibration and the occasional feeling of him moving. I never did get to find out exactly what happened to the guy. They were able to tell me enough that the cause of death wasn't suspicious, so I just kind of replied with natural causes. And the cop looks a bit weird and says that he can't really say any more. And for a while that kind of bothered me. How can you die in a non-suspicious manner but not of natural causes? And that kind of stuck with me. This old guy had gone to that theater alone, likely taken some kind of overdose, and allowed himself to just sort of drift off peacefully in his sleep. What he took, I don't know, because fatal overdoses are usually messy, painful, and ugly. But clearly he got hold of something that let him die peacefully during the previous showing of the Silence of the Lambs. It always bothered me how he wasn't discovered by a theater employee in between the showings. He'd possibly been sitting there for 3 showings of that damn movie and nobody noticed but me. I mean, it wasn't the cleanest theater, but good God, did they not even check the screens between showings? And the final thing that bothers me is, why did he choose The Silence of the Lambs as the final thing he ever saw? It's not exactly a nice movie to just sort of slip away to. Maybe it was the only movie showing that was relatively empty when he got there, which would have been that afternoon, I guess. Maybe there was something in the film he related to, or maybe he was simply haunted by his own lambs that he needed to silence. This happened many years ago now. It must have been 1997 because I was at a showing of Scream with my then girlfriend and it was just past New Year's. The movie had been showing for a few weeks at this point, so it wasn't a very busy showing. Perfect for a date night with a girl like Jennifer. And she often reacted to scary movies by getting handsy and grabby-holdy of me, if you know what I mean. And I'd learned some time ago that horror movies were a great way to get a bit of extra affection. Now, what can I say? We were first-year college students. Of course, we'd find any excuse to get our hands all over each other. And we weren't the only 2 people at the showing of Scream that night who would be making a lot of physical contact, although of course we just didn't know that yet. Now we got some popcorn, we got some soda, tickets were clipped and seats were taken, trailers were watched, as they are. And Drew Barrymore got grilled on her favorite scary movie. You know the scene, everyone's seen the original Scream by now. And things started kicking off during that scene where Randy, Billy, and Stu were in the video rental store. And so if you're one of the 3 people who hasn't seen the original Scream, it's a bit meta. It deconstructs the slasher movie genre a lot, and one character in particular, Randy, he's the narrative vehicle for doing all of that. I don't remember the exact details. I was making out with my girl at the time and failing to pay too much attention to the bits where people weren't getting murdered. But a person who was a few rows ahead of ours really didn't agree with something Randy said about the rules of horror movies. So much so, in fact, that he yelled out his disagreement at the screen. Now, you gotta remember, this was back in the 90s. And back then, keeping your damn mouth shut was normal etiquette in movie theaters. Outside of very specific, obviously intended moments, you didn't just yell at movies, and you certainly don't provide angry, nerdy commentary to nobody in particular because you disagreed with the writer. Well, this guy did, and we'll just call him Mitchell, although I have absolutely no idea what his name was, of course. He started yelling and hooting about the integrity of the horror genre, and that's when the guy next to him started screaming too. Like I said, it was an empty movie theater. These two guys had been sitting next to each other, so I assumed they were together, but later found out that no, they were strangers who decided they absolutely had to stick to their assigned seats instead of sitting anywhere they wanted in the theater. The second guy, who I'll just call Steve, he wasn't screaming at the movie though. Steve was screaming at Mitchell for screaming at the movie. I don't remember the exact exchange, but I remember it well enough that I can make parts of it up for impact. Stuff like, "Dude, it's just a movie. Sit the F down and shut the F up," Steve yelled. Now, I should note at this point, Mitchell was still sitting down. He was just kind of flailing his fists around and being very animated. "Are you listening to this?" Mitchell yelled back at Steve, gesturing to the screen and then to Steve and then to the mostly empty movie theater. Jennifer had grabbed my arm and was kind of cowering down in her seat, hoping that we wouldn't get noticed by these weirdos. "I'm trying to listen to the movie," Steve said, and this seemed to calm Mitchell down for a few minutes. Then something else and scream set him off. God knows what it was, but I'd stopped paying attention. This time, though, Mitchell really did stand up and started yelling at the screen like the characters could fully hear him and react to him. He was actually genuinely offended at some opinion that one of the characters had about horror movies. Now, don't get me wrong, he wasn't delusional. He knew that there was a writer speaking through the characters, and he knew Wes Craven had directed the movie, so a lot of his ire was directed at poor old Wes. Now, rest in peace to the big man, one of the best horror directors of our time, by the way. He was still alive at the time of the story, obviously, and Mitchell was very angry at him for his disrespect of the horror genre. I've never seen anyone behave so stupidly or oblivious to this day. Mitchell was screeching about the hypocrisy on display. I don't think it even made sense with what the movie was actually saying. He just decided that Scream was taking potshots at his beloved horror genre, and nothing anyone could say or do was going to change his mind. That's what I assumed anyway, and I whispered that to Jennifer. "Well, look," she whispered back. Now, Mitchell was a big guy. From a few rows back, anyway, he appeared to be around 6 feet and nearly 300 pounds of fat and muscle. And then Steve stood up and squared up to him. Now, Steve was not a tall, muscular powerhouse at all. He was 5'6", if that, and he was one of those thin, pasty dudes you see a lot of on YouTube these days, with long hair and a white t-shirts. You know the type I mean. But good God, Steve squared up to Mitchell like he was Stone Cold Steve Austin. He had the confidence of a man who knew, unquestionably, that he could kick this other guy's ass, and if it came to it, he would. So Steve reaches out and pokes Mitchell in the chest and says something like, "Just shut the F up and sit down, buddy. Do us all a favor. Some of us are trying to watch the movie." Now, me and Jennifer were paying attention now. I grab a handful of popcorn. Jennifer whispers to me, asking to take bets on what's going to happen next, and I tell her I think Mitchell is going to back down. But I was wrong. I was very, very wrong. Instead, this Mitchell guy let out what I guess was intended to be a roar, but his voice cracked mid-growl, so it was kind of like, and then he just grabbed Steve's outreached finger, and with an actual audible crack, snaps his finger backwards. We're all just staring at this, completely shell-shocked. Steve takes a few steps back into the aisle, and he's staring at his finger bent backwards and then back up at Mitchell. Even in the dark of the theater, I see a look pass over Steve's face that even to this day makes my stomach sink. It was the look of a man who realized that he just made a very big mistake. You see, that confident "I got this" guy I'd imagined Steve has in that moment, he obviously didn't exist. I guess he thought Mitchell would have fallen for it and backed down, but not so much. Remember how I'd also assumed Mitchell was an unfit kind of slob? Who knows if I was right about that, but this guy had heft, and he threw himself at Steve, just full-on charged into him in the aisle like a goddamn bull. Slammed Steve straight into the floor so hard that we actually heard another crack. And then Mitchell was pounding, punching, pummeling him. His fat fists were flying, blood was literally coming from Steve's mouth as Mitchell was just wailing on him, continuing to shriek and yell about the movie, about horror, about disrespect, all sorts of incoherent crap that made him sound like the obvious violent nutjob that he clearly was. Of course, being a hot-blooded 18-year-old male, I wasn't just going to sit there and watch this guy get destroyed just for telling Mitchell to shut up. And despite Jennifer begging me not to get involved, I started to make my way down the aisle in the semi-darkness. Now again, I was taking my time a little, hoping another savior might show up in the meantime, and thankfully she did. Out of nowhere, vaulting over chairs like some Olympian, this woman came sprinting out of left field, shocking all of us. Except Mitchell, of course, who was too busy beating on Steve to notice her. The woman, I'm just going to call her Venus, took advantage of Mitchell's obliviousness. A few feet away, I saw her stop. Then she took a running kick, knocking Mitchell clear off of Steve and sending him rolling down the aisle a few feet. Barely even pausing to leap over Steve, Venus then whipped something from her belt. I heard the sound of a spray can, and Mitchell's screams changed dramatically. Turns out our savior was an off-duty homicide detective at the theater with her husband to enjoy a romantic date night together. Mitchell got a face full of mace, a boot's worth of broken ribs, and a handcuffing in the form of plastic ties that Venus kept on her person while off-duty just in case situations like this arose. She later joked that she never expected to actually have to perform an off-duty arrest. Steve was fine, except for a few broken teeth, and as for what happened after to Mitchell, Steve, and this Venus character, I can only guess. We missed the end of the movie, obviously, and we were all offered refunds and comp tickets for any showing or movie of our choice. Someone tells me they didn't extend this offer to Mitchell, though. Now, I scored points with Jennifer for at least intending to be a hero, but I'll leave that up to you to decide how that manifested. Now, this was all 30 years ago now, but I still think on it from time to time. I hope Steve, Venus, and her husband are all doing well, if they're actually still around. And Jennifer and I ultimately didn't stay together, but we are still Facebook friends, and she seems to be doing good. To this day, though, I've still never watched the second half of Scream. I decided to leave the rest of the movie up to my imagination because sometimes fiction can never compete with the insanity that is reality. So some years ago, I worked as a cleaner at a local, reasonably large theater in my city. Things weren't as bad back then as they are now, but holy gosh darn, even back before the old Rona, theatergoers were just filthy animals. And sometimes it was fine, but on an average Friday night showing, I'd spend hours cleaning up copious amounts of popcorn, spilled soda, candy, and chocolate wrappers, melted chocolate bars, all sorts. And sometimes it would be things that we didn't even sell. I once found a seat stuck together by a full, untouched bologna sandwich, and I swear I'd watch the theatergoers head into the movie, and there would be more food to clean up than they took with them in the first place. And that was the good times. You don't even know what the amount of vile, unspeakable things that I had to scrub away with the aid of rubber gloves, a hard-bristled brush, and industrial-strength detergent. Let's just say, people are disgusting, yo. I guess it came as a shock at first, because my mama raised me right and good and taught me to clean up after my own damn self. And we also grew up poor, and me and my mother and younger brother Tyrell, so if I bought a hot dog, then I was damn well gonna eat that hot dog, not just squash it into a cup holder. Now, believe it or not though, the disgusting hygiene and cleanliness of others isn't the point of this scary story. It's about one night when I was working very late. I think it was a midnight showing of Hereditary. Midnight showings at our theater actually meant that it hit midnight around the halfway point, so by the time the movie was done and everyone had filed out, I was there to clean up close to 2 a.m. Thankfully, it didn't seem too chaotic. I went about my business with my trash bag, my little grabby claw, and my bucket on wheels filled with the usual equipment. And so movie theaters get lit up after a movie's been shown, right? Well, in our movie theater anyways, after a midnight showing, they just kind of kept the lights dim. I guess they were just too cheap to give the poor cleaning girl full clear vision, who knows. But I was cool with it. I'd caught the tail end of the movie and it gave me the spooks, so I was kind of enjoying the atmosphere of a half-lit movie theater as I went about cleaning up. Then movement caught my eye. Something sort of skittering across the aisle near the front, from one row to the other side. And I say this like a spider, but it was the size of a human being, like someone had rapidly crawled from one side of row C to the other.
Anyone there?"
I called out, praying to the Lord above that there wouldn't be a reply. And there wasn't, of course. There must have been my imagination, I guess, so I just went back to cleaning. And then, no mistaking it, rustling from near aisle E, the sound of popcorn crunching underfoot, and I'd know that sound anywhere. What the hell should I do, I thought. I had no idea who was left in that theater that late at night, and for all I knew, it was just me and our old-ass manager. I heard a sound from across the theater. It was hard to tell in the gloom, but it looked like someone had thrown a soda cup across the room. Then, while my gaze was pointed in that direction, a shadow darted over the seats near the front of the screen. More crunching sounds, and then suddenly silence. I began to creep slowly as I could toward the exit door, and for a moment, I thought I'd screwed myself when my shoe got stuck on some sticky soda spill, and I grabbed the sheet, shaking it somewhat. There was silence, and I made it almost to the exit. And then I heard more skittering lower down the room. I stayed very still, waiting, pretending like I'd left. A shape crawled along the aisle, and this time I saw them very clearly. It was a person. A thin, emaciated-looking person dragging themselves commando-style across the aisle. Oh, hell no. Hell to the no. I wasn't sticking around for this.
"I'm just gonna back out real slowly,"
I called out into the darkness. But a voice spoke back. I have no idea what she said. It was in a language that I honestly couldn't really tell what it was, and it didn't sound threatening though, almost scared. Now I called out asking if the person was okay, but no reply. But I could hear them moving around and it sounded like they were getting closer, and I didn't like that. My plan was to leave and call the cops. But then that figure, the person, fully leaped over the seats, hurtling forward over the next aisle too, leaping straight for me. They were yelling something I couldn't understand, but they didn't sound scared anymore. I kind of froze, not sure which direction to go. Right would lead me to the aisle and let me leave the theater, but in the half-darkness, this figure charging at me, leaping over chairs, I was not thinking straight. When she was just an aisle away, I saw that she was some Caucasian girl, looked like a teenager. She had short, filthy blonde hair, her face was dirty, and she had ketchup and mustard smeared around her mouth. This young white lady had been crawling around eating the vile leftovers off the theater floor. It's funny how your mind acts in a pinch, because my immediate thought was pity for this hungry, emaciated teenager. And like I said, I grew up poor and I sympathized. But my moment of empathy caused me to freeze, and she leaped over the final aisle and was on top of me. I don't think she wanted to hurt me. I think she just hadn't understood me and wanted to make sure that she could escape without me somehow restraining her. But still, she threw me back against the seat hard, and I heard my spine even crack in a way that made me wince. Now don't worry, I'm fine. It was just kind of like cracking a knuckle, as it turns out. And then this chick was sort of shaking me, spit flying onto my face. She's kind of yelling, sort of begging in whatever language she was talking in, and so I did the only thing I could think to do. I grabbed her head with both my hands and turned her face toward a whole pile of popcorn on the floor and just yelled, "Eat it," hoping that she'd get the point that I was just going to let her. And she did. She jumped off of me, went toward that popcorn, and just began pouring it into her own face. Now this psycho had scared me, but I didn't have it in my heart to get some teenage runaway busted by the cops. And maybe this was a dumb idea, but you hear about young girls running away like this for a good reason, and then end up being sent back to places that ruin them forever. So I let her eat for a minute, and then just kind of poked her gently with my trash grabber claw. "Hey, you gotta go," I told her, gesturing at the exit door at the back which led outside. She starts shaking her head and just kept shoveling that popcorn into her mouth.
"My boss is gonna be here any minute. You gotta go."
I said, gesturing again, hoping she understood enough English to at least comprehend what I was saying. And I guess she did, because she takes one final scoop of popcorn and then just starts running towards the exit door. And it was only later that I realized how much damn danger I just put myself in and how potentially stupid I'd been in that moment. I never told anyone about this incident, but I had nightmares about it for weeks. Only in those nightmares, she wasn't some harmless girl from Eastern Europe or wherever she was from. She was a demon crawling between the aisles, eating its way through the seats. I'm pretty sure I even saw her again once. It was a couple of years later, shortly before I left the theater to move on to bigger, better things. And she was there on, I guess, a date? The guy she was with, he didn't look like a good kind of person, not at all. And I guess you shouldn't just judge a book by its cover, but he gave me really bad vibes. And to this day, I wonder if he was someone that she met on the streets or someone she'd been sent back home to. All I know is cleaning movie theaters at night can be a freaking terrifying thing. I see the TikToks and the YouTube shorts of the way people leave things, and I just sort of laugh because, girls, if that's as bad as it gets for you, then you're lucky. Because I learned that day, sometimes there's more to be afraid of than finding a squished hot dog in your theater aisle. When I was in college in the mid-2000s, I joined the AV Club. One of the many AV Club activities involved having an every other week movie night, where a chosen curator would show 2 movies on the projector in our auditorium and give a little speech about their choices afterwards. I guess the main purpose was to familiarize ourselves with the equipment, which was kind of the point of the club. But I think for most of us, AV Club came second to Movie Club. I know it was my highlight anyway, at least until it wasn't. The AV Club president was called John Weiss, and we'd been friends since elementary school. Our parents were friends, he and I were friends, and our friends were friends. And I won't lie, I loved John. You know the rapper Lil Dicky? That guy reminds me so much of John, especially in his show Dave. John was smart, hilarious, and growing up he was sort of like a brother to me. And yeah, you can kind of see where this is going, can't you? To me, he was like my brother from another mother. To him, he was relegated to a certain zone, for friends, and I had absolutely no idea. Just no clue whatsoever that he had feelings for me. I know people don't often believe when we say this, and maybe in a lot of cases it's true, but here I genuinely did not. In fact, not to rub salt in the wound, but I was pretty sure that he was gay. I mean, the first movie that he showed at AV Club was Listomania, for Christ's sake. In a double feature with Schindler's List to give you an idea of his sense of humor. In fact, I was so sure that he was gay that I had a running joke with my close friend Tommy that John had a crush on him. It was one of those jokes where you say it because you have a crush on that person. And it turns out that Tommy reciprocated and we got together, and despite him being a jock and me being an AV Club geek, we soon became blah blah college hottest freshman couple. It turns out Tommy reciprocated and we got together. And despite him being a jock and me being an AV Club geek, we soon became blah blah college hottest freshman couple. Now anyway, AV Movie Club went well for like a year or more. Things with John and the rest of the gang went well as well, and things with Tommy went great. I've been kind of a wallflower in high school, a theater kid but a behind-the-scenes type, a bit of a plain Jane who wasn't into things like makeup or fashion, etc. In college, I guess I kind of blossomed. And hell was I going to make the most of it with my jock boyfriend who looked like a superhero but was as nerdy as me. And what I mean is, we made love a lot. No, I'm sorry, TMI, but this is relevant, I promise. AV Movie Club was always on a Friday. In this case, it was April Friday the 13th. Unlucky for some, huh? And it was John's turn to host again. He set up the projector and took the stage. He told us that in the spirit of Friday the 13th, we were going to be watching Friday the 13th Part 5, which according to him was the best one. But first, we were going to watch an indie horror movie that he'd been very lucky to acquire. I forget exactly what he implied, but it was enough to have all of us excited. And without further ado, John returned to the projector at the back, dimmed the lights, and rolled the movie. It began with shaky handycam footage of someone walking through the undergrowth. You could hear loud, eerie breathing. And then an 80s-looking title card briefly appeared. It said, Heart Eater. I could feel a strange ringing in my ears. Something about what was happening on screen was making me deeply uncomfortable. The dorm building was familiar. Very familiar. It was Tommy's dorm. But wait, of course it was familiar. This was an indie horror film filmed on campus. We'd recognize everything we saw, obviously. The creeper with the camera crunched his way around the back of the building. There was a light snowfall on the ground, so I could tell that this had been filmed back in February. This was very indie. No boom mic, no sound crew, just the built-in mic on what I was sure was the AV Club camcorder. And I felt a sinking feeling as that camera creep began to approach a certain ground floor window. Somehow I'd known this was coming, though. I even knew exactly when this had been filmed and what was soon to happen. What I didn't know was just how much had been captured on camera. Still breathing heavily, camera creep snuck up to Tommy's window. Back then, we were young, dumb, and horny, and sometimes when the mood took us, we'd be all over each other without being 100% careful about our privacy. The window in Tommy's room looked out into the woods anyhow, and nobody ever went back there. Now what I'm saying is, the day this Heart Eater movie had been filmed, Tommy and I had begun to get carried away, getting hot and heavy, without making sure that the curtains were closed. I won't describe the 10-minute scene that we were forced to sit through. I am grateful that the filmmaker masked our identities by using some kind of film distortion technique to make our faces look inhuman, like it was part of the narrative. It painted a clear picture that the fornicating couple were in some way the villains here, despite the presence of the camera creep breathing heavily and struggling to hold the camera steady as he focused on us. Unfortunately, the filmmaker did not show the same approach to anonymity towards our bodies as he did our faces. Everything was on display. Next to me, I could feel Tommy tensing, getting ready to leap up and throw hands. I pressed his thigh, and I shook my head. See, here was the problem. Nobody else knew it was us. By this point, obviously I'd started to suspect that the filmmaker, camera creep, was actually John. But he'd blurred our faces, he'd stylized the shots so you couldn't identify Tommy's room, or even if you could, nobody at AV Club would have been in his dorm room anyway as far as I knew. I doubted any of them even knew which dorm building he stayed in. So, if we said anything at all, we'd basically be revealing to everyone that this adult film on display was us. I knew how the scene ended because I remembered that day. Tommy had been convinced that he heard someone outside the window and had dived butt naked to challenge that intruder. And now I got to see it from camera creep's perspective. He'd been filming through the corner of the window, clearly pretty well hidden, and as soon as he sensed Tommy reacting, he began to run into the forest. Then, and to give him credit, he did make this scene pretty tense and eerie. He filmed from behind a tree as Tommy, digitally altered to look like some kind of inhuman glitch being, pulled shut the curtains. I could feel Tommy shaking with rage beside me. But what could we do? I didn't want these people to know it was my naked body they'd been watching in this art house indie horror, nor did Tommy, thankfully. Instead, we just sat there through the final scene. In it, camera creep filmed himself in the mirror. It was John, of course, I could tell, but he wore one of those blank, faceless masks. There was no dialogue in the movie. Instead, he put the camera down and, in lipstick, wrote on the mirror that his heart had been eaten. Then he removed his shirt to show an admittedly impressive fake wound where his heart should have been. He reached up and touched the wound, then the mask, and began to remove it. Once the mask was gone, it revealed his face was all glitchy like ours had been. Cut to black. End credits comprising a handful of names that were completely fabricated. Honestly, for a terrible college art house horror movie, it wouldn't have been that bad. The AV Movie Club gave it a bunch of awkward applause. The problem was, only myself, Tommy, and John, I hoped it was just us three anyway, knew that it was in fact a revenge film for an unrequited crush that this guy must have harbored towards me for who knew how long. It was pretty easy to work out the motive, from the name of the movie and the plot. The only way to challenge this would be to out ourselves to everyone else. So for that night, instead of revealing John for the creep that he was, we just sat there and watched Friday the 13th Part 5 with the rest of the gang and pretended that the most horrifying, surreal, creepy experience of our lives hadn't just taken place. But don't worry, there was a final act. Neither Tommy nor I planned to let it go. And so that night, we slipped away, quietly depriving John of the confrontation he'd likely been gearing up for. You can decide for yourself if we did the right thing. I know we didn't handle it like adults, and I won't pretend we did, but I also don't regret it, not even a little. What we did was simple. We acted like we had no idea what he was talking about. Every time John brought up the footage or tried to gauge our reactions, we just sort of blinked, confused. He started acting like a dog that expected to get kicked every time someone walked by, but that kick never came. We kept showing up to AV Club like nothing happened. And nearly a year went by. We figured that was enough time to convince him that the storm had passed, that nothing was coming, and that's when we made our move. And by then, we were sophomores. The club had grown, packed with new freshman faces, and eventually it was my turn to host a screening night. I picked 2 long, slow-burn films that would run late into the night. Long enough that when John walked home to his off-campus apartment, he didn't live in the dorms anymore. It would be well past midnight. Tommy and I lived in the opposite directions, so we had built-in alibis, and even if John had suspected something, what was he going to say? That he was being targeted because of something he'd filmed illegally over a year ago? What we did wasn't direct. We found a local message board and posted under a throwaway account, and we said that there was a guy who had been creeping around campus, trying to lure girls into his car. We described John in vague but recognizable detail. We gave a location, a time, and we said that we were planning to confront him and needed backup. We said to wear masks so nobody could identify each other, and we said that we'd be there too. Well, we weren't. We stayed far away. There was a chance no one would show up. There was a chance someone would go too far, and yes, sometimes I still think about that, about how we dangled something like bait, but we didn't lie. John was a predator. We just gave the facts and let other people's anger do the rest. The next day, word spread fast. John had been followed, cornered and humiliated, stripped and tied to a lamppost, wallet gone, phone smashed. No serious injuries, but enough to make a point. Campus police ruled it a mugging. John didn't offer much detail, probably because he had no way of knowing who was behind it. Or maybe he did and just couldn't bring himself to say it out loud. And we never talked about it again. What John did to us was despicable, but the way we handled it, maybe that was too. Maybe we became something else in the process. Villains in a story nobody else ever heard. And do I regret it? Not entirely. There's still a part of me that thinks justice was done, even if it came wearing a different face. Just a quick story for you here. I found you through a podcast and saw you took submissions on this YouTube, so I thought I'd shoot you a quick email. A couple of years back, after the lockdowns here in the UK had lifted and everyone was desperate to get back to the movie theaters again, my family and I decided to go. So the hubby and I decided that we'd let our kids pick the movie. Never again, though. They picked this crap called Shazam, Fury of the Gods or something, which was a sequel to a movie that we hadn't seen in the Batman series or something like that. However, they were absolutely adamant that it was the new Captain Marvel movie. Needless to say, it was not, so they were restless and angry right from the get-go. At the time, my boy was 8 and my girl was 6. I'm guessing my family weren't the only ones bored by the movie because, close to the front, a group of teens were being fairly obnoxious, using their phones and just generally being a bit rowdy. Normally, I'm the first to criticize their behavior, but this movie was so bad and so hard to follow that I'm not sure that I really could blame them too much. There was a woman up front, closer to them, who seemed to be there with a guy. I can't tell if he was her adult son or if she was just a cougar, but I think it was the latter. Now anyways, in fairness, the teens were closer to her than they were to us, and maybe she was a really big fan of this Shazam character and this was her most awaited film of the year. Now I still think that she could have just tried asking those teens to pipe down and put their phones away though. Instead, and I kid you not, She jumped up from her seat, vaulted over into the next aisle, and then walked up behind the boys, screaming, "Shut up!" and then proceeds to grab one of the teens' phones. He swung around in his seat, and I guess something in the woman's eyes spooked him because he began frantically apologizing. This teenage boy was terrified of this Karen. Honestly, I didn't blame him. She was pretty intimidating. And Karen was having none of it. She flung the boy's phone down, and from the sound, she stamped on it. One of his friends, a bigger kid, started squaring up to the Karen and began climbing over the seat. And that's when she reached into her handbag that she'd been carrying and pulled out what looked like a long wooden brush. And with this big swing, she clocked this kid straight in the jaw with a goddamn back scrubber or something. She hit him so hard that the stick literally broke, and the brush head part went flying off into the dark auditorium. At that point, chaos ensued. Kids were wailing, adults were screaming. The adult son/Karen's boy toy was rushing over to try and de-escalate the situation. And I just simply grabbed my family, ushered them into the foyer, and told the cinema employees that a woman was going mad in there and had just assaulted a kid with a weapon. There was no way that I was sticking around to witness what played out. We fled from the movie theater and drove home. And I saw in the local paper the next day that an altercation had occurred in that cinema, and I was never able to find any more about it. I'm guessing she was rich and paid the kid off or something like that to keep it out of the court, or I don't know. But it was an absolutely terrifying thing to witness. Horrible, yes, but on the plus side, at least we didn't have to sit through the rest of that movie. I was a little kid when this happened. I lived in a small town in England, and we didn't have a cinema for quite a while. So when one opened, it was a novelty, and my mom would take me a lot. It's different now, and it's been expanded, but back then there were 5 screens, 3 larger ones and then 2 small ones down towards the end of the building and down a long corridor, and then a thinner corridor spanned off from that, leading to the 2 bathrooms, men's and women's. So I forget which film we were there to see, but this was before the film started. I needed to use the bathroom, but I had a drink and popcorn, and I didn't want to take them into the bathroom with me. Mom was chatting to a friend who worked at the cinema, so I was just hanging out at the start of the corridor leading to the bathrooms, waiting impatiently. Just to clarify, though, I was maybe 7 here, so hanging around outside the bathrooms didn't make me look like a weirdo. I'm there waiting for Mom to show up, eating little bits of popcorn while I wait, when I see him. A huge tall guy in a long waxed raincoat. I'm not sure if they're popular in the States, but here when I was a kid they were called yuppie coats in my area. Very dark green long raincoats made of thick canvas materials. I guess rich people originally wore them, but now they were just typical outdoor coats. So this guy was wearing that and had longish hair, and he looked maybe in his 50s or older, and now I'll just reiterate here, this was back in the 90s, so it was before the popularity of gender fluidity and non-binary identities and whatnot. If you were trans, then you dressed, often as a requirement for gender-affirming treatment, as the gender you wanted to be. Not my words, just trying to explain it. And the point is, this was a man. He was not making any attempts to appear as anything but a man. And he walked straight down the bathroom corridor and into the ladies' toilets. I knew something felt very wrong about this, so I kept watching the door, and thankfully Mom showed up seconds later. I told her what I'd seen, and she immediately went to get a cinema employee. During this time, I did not move from my spot looking down the corridor. If this man had left the ladies' room, I would have seen him. So Mom gets back with the female cinema employee who goes into the bathroom, and she comes out a few minutes later looking at me strangely. There was no tall, hefty guy in a raincoat here. In fact, there was nobody in the bathroom at all. It was entirely empty. She asked me if maybe I'd been mistaken and he'd gone into the men's. I said I didn't think so. She knocked on the men's and then called in, and when there was no answer, opened the door, and the men's bathroom was empty too. She asked me if there was any chance that the man had left the bathroom in the meantime, and I assured her that it was totally, utterly impossible, and I meant it. I don't know for sure what happened that day. What I do know is that I 100% definitely saw a large man go into the ladies' bathroom, and then the bathroom was empty the next time someone went into it. I am certain that he didn't leave through the door, or realize that he'd gone into the wrong bathroom and switched to the men's. I was watching intently because the whole thing obviously creeped me out. What I do know, though, is that a couple of years later, the part of the ceiling of the cinema collapsed while people were in one of the screens watching a movie. Thankfully, nobody was hurt, but it turned out there was a huge amount of space at the top of the building that spanned most of the area, and that it hadn't been constructed very well, apparently, since it eventually collapsed. I know I saw a large, creepy-looking guy go into that bathroom, and I know he then disappeared. My theory is that he somehow knew how to get into the crawl space through a ceiling vent, and then went off and did something. What and why, I don't know. It's either that or my local cinema, which is still there to this day, albeit very much refurbished and higher quality, with a fixed ceiling, is haunted by the ghost of a large man who hangs around the bathrooms. And honestly, I don't know which theory I prefer. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over to my email at letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, my voice is gonna give you pink ear.